Fall is here, and for all anglers, whether you fish from the bass boat or the bank, fishing can get tough. The days are getting shorter, the weather is up, down, left, and right, which can all lead to difficult catching. But why? Well, in today's episode of Bass Behavior, I'm gonna dive deep into the mood and behavior patterns of bass throughout the fall time so you can go out there and have less bad days and much more success. My name's Tyler, and let's talk about it.
Another giant, another giant. Look at that, y'all.
I can't believe what I just caught.
Yes!
Well, what's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Behavior. I am pumped about today's episode because really, I think for all of us, fall has officially arrived, and with it comes cold, nasty weather, which for me at least necessitates waterproof boots. This video is brought to you by Brunt Workwear. Y'all have seen at this point that I wear my Brunt boots all over the place on camera. I'm talking pond hopping, in the jet boat, and now that it's rainy and cold, in the bass boat as well. These things have been absolutely amazing for me out on the water, and they make the most comfortable pair of work boots out there with zero break-in period. They are comfy, straight out of the box, right on your foot to go out and wear for the first day out on the job. For bank beating especially, having a waterproof pair of boots was a non-negotiable, and so when they sent me this pair right here, the Ring, which by the way, most of the boots are fully waterproof, but this one here has been awesome. It was designed by a US Army veteran and a lineman, somebody who knows a thing or two about doing manly work, and I'm not saying pond hopping is manly work, but sometimes I am walking through nasty sticks and brushes and stepping into water I didn't know was there. This pair of boots has been awesome, and as you can tell, I've been wearing them out. And with the holiday season coming up, Brunt Workwear makes awesome gifts for the hard worker or the hard worker and hardworking fisherman in your life, or heck, maybe a surprise gift for yourself. And the good news for y'all is that code TylersReal10 saves you $10 off your first Brunt Workwear order. You can go to the link in the video description or click the QR code that's been over here on the side of the screen. Big thanks to Brunt for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get into some fall bass behavior. First, talking about some biology. And the biology I want to discuss is twofold. One, how the environment, how the ecosystem changes and evolves as the year progresses into the fall season, and two, how the bass react to those changes, especially in water conditions. So strap in, get your notebook out, because it's gonna be a lot of science, especially packed in the first half of today's video, but I promise you, if you pay attention and note how it affects your bodies of water, it will help you become a vastly improved fisherman this fall especially. And big thanks to fisheries biologist and friend of mine, Stephen Barden, for helping me put these fall thoughts into a good, cohesive masterclass. I may have my phone out throughout this video, so I apologize for checking my notes. It's pretty detailed stuff. Let's begin. So the first thing we have to discuss is the state of the water in your body of water. And when I say body of water, pond, lake in this video, I'm kind of going to use all of those interchangeably. But again, this video is for every angler, not just big lake anglers. So we have to discuss, how is the water? Where is the water? What kind is the water? Because leading up to the fall, a ton of changes occur. As water heats up from spring going into the summer, a process occurs called stratification. And what that means in water terms is that there is a separation into different sectors, different zones, you could say, from the top zones closest to the water surface to the bottom zones closest to the bottom. A separation, a stratification occurs, and especially as the water gets warmer and warmer and warmer, those zones closer to the bottom of your pond or lake have less oxygen, have more amounts of bad bacteria and just kind of nasty buildup in the water, and less sunlight that reaches down there. And so that water on the lower sections is less healthy than the water above. And that forms what's called a thermocline, where I wouldn't say nothing can live underneath that, but at least for long periods of time, fish and wildlife, big and small, should not go beneath that because there's not enough healthy water, especially healthy oxygen levels, for those fish to live beneath. So you're seeing examples on the screen here of what a thermocline looks like. And one very Gen Z way you can think about a thermocline is in terms of Fortnite. That's right, the storm in Fortnite I kind of equate to living beneath the thermocline. Can you go into the storm and still survive? Yes, but you're gonna take damage. And so you gotta, as a fish, live above that when it exists in your bodies of water. Now, Tyler, you may say, I fish in ponds, and most of the examples you just showed on the screen were in larger lakes using fish finders to find a thermocline. So do I have stratification forming a divide, a body of water line from oxygen to no oxygen in my pond? And the answer is yes, quite possibly you do. And it all comes down to two things: water depth and water clarity. Small ponds and lakes that are deep have the ability to hold their temperature against the atmosphere, therefore allowing stratification, a thermocline, to occur. But really shallow lakes and ponds do not have that kind of a buffer, and so the water mixes from top to bottom a whole lot more, oftentimes not allowing stratification to take place. Now, the other big factor I mentioned was water clarity, and Stephen told me that in science terms, kind of a layman's way to find the thermocline or the stratification taking place in your body of water is to take the water clarity and multiply it by 3. And so if you fish a pond and the max depth is 8 feet of water, let's say, and the water clarity is 8 feet, it is crystal clear, you can see all the way down to the bottom, you take 8 times 3, that is 24. You're not going to have any thermocline because it's not 24 feet deep in that pond. There's no ability for stratification to take place. But an 8-foot pond that has 1 foot water visibility, again, 1 times 3, you may have a thermocline somewhere around 3 feet deep. And again, just to reiterate, the ecosystem and every fish, and especially bass that we're targeting in your body of water, if stratification has occurred from spring to summer to early fall, cannot live long-term underneath the thermocline. So if you notice on your fish finder, you have that weird distinct line on the lake you fish, and it's the month of June through September, it's going to be best to fish above that area no matter where you are on the lake. So hopefully at this point, that science information has helped you pinpoint what the bass may be doing, what the ecosystem may be up to in the body of water that you fish, but that just gets us up to the fall. As soon as the fall comes, it all happens in reverse and so many things change. Because when the weather turns from southern winds to northern winds, from warm fronts to cold fronts, so many things can happen in your body of water, the biggest of which is called a turnover. And does it happen in your ponds? You bet your bottom dollar it does. As overnight temperatures drop where you live in the early fall, these surface layers of water will slowly get colder, but often the daytime temperatures continue to stay high. And so as the wind is pretty consistent from the south, you're going to have some cold nights, but the days bring that water temperature back up. And so it doesn't really allow that upper levels of the water, again, the upper levels of stratification, to equalize to the bottom levels. But as soon as you start having cold fronts during the day where you have north winds, you have cold daytime temperatures, especially a ton of wind on your body of water stirring up the water system, then you have equilibrium at some point occurring in your ponds and lakes from the top levels through the thermocline to the bottom levels. And when those water temperatures equalize all throughout the water, the body of water, that is when the lake will turn over, it will flip. And it's not so much that like the water on the top and the bottom flip where like all the oxygen is now on the bottom. It's just a total turbid mixture of your body of water, and that can make fishing really, really tough. And so when I put this video out, the turnover has definitely happened for a lot of you guys that are up north in the country, but for us down south, it is currently happening right now. And as those layers mix, you're gonna have really, really tough fishing for a period of like a week to a month, depending on how long it takes in your body of water. And like I said, if the water is shallower, that turnover, that flipping, mixing of water layers is gonna happen a lot quicker than a very deep body of water will. Now, Tyler, how do I overcome the fall fishing slump of the turnover and actually catch fish during this time of the year? My best advice would be twofold, I guess threefold. Fish shallow, fish healthy aquatic vegetation, as that helps keep oxygen in the area. But the biggest thing I've learned, especially this fall as I fished, I've seen it today in the area I'm sitting right now, you want to get as far up a creek as possible, especially if you have any kind of rainfall. Now, I know I said you want to fish the clearest water possible, and so rainfall usually can bring in some dirty water, and you know what? That is okay. A little bit of dirty, dingy water will be better than the dirty, dingy water on the main lake because that has no oxygen. The water coming in from the rain will have oxygen. And so are you going to have absolutely amazing days by going up a creek in the fall? Potentially, but it still might be rough. It's just a whole lot less rough bite-wise than out there on the main lake, at least during the turnover time period. Immediately following the turnover, though, is when the lake starts to equalize and all the bait fish and bass that were in the backs of creeks are kind of migrating around the lake. I wouldn't say they all go from the back all the way back to the main lake. Some of them do, and thanks to forward-facing sonar, we know now a ton of fish just kind of cruise out in the open chasing bait balls around, and that's a great way to catch them. But really overall, that time of the fall is when the feed truly begins because the fish know the days are getting shorter, the water is getting colder. Bass being a cold-blooded creature, their metabolism slows down as their body gets colder and colder, and so just based on how long they've lived, they understand our ecosystem is slowing down, therefore we have to speed up to get ready for the winter, and that's when the true fall feed begins. And if your body of water doesn't have bait fish, I know a lot of you guys up north who are still fishing this fall, you are mainly bluegill fisheries and some crawfish, so you got to find the locations, as I'm backing into a tree here. You got to find the forage that is available to those fish. Down south for us, it is majority bait fish, so threadfin, gizzard shad. That's why big glide baits work in the fall, but also these things right here, tiny square bills. I love the Strike King 1.0. But if you live in Minnesota and all you have is bluegill and crawfish, just find the areas where those things group together. At some point though, the crawfish will, if they're burrowing crawfish, will start burrowing themselves into the ground and the crawfish bite kind of dies. But the bluegill will stay in groups and will oftentimes head to the same areas they were in the summertime, those offshore deep rock edges, grass edges if the grass is still alive. But as the fall transitions into winter, that grass will pretty quickly die. Now, one fall talking point I've seen in so many videos across the internet about fall fishing, especially by pro anglers, is, man, the fish just go in the back of the creeks and they stay there all fall and you just got to chase the bait. And while that is not necessarily false, it just doesn't really paint an entire picture of what's going on. Hopefully this has helped you guys understand some of the fish go back there. They can be easier to catch on really tough fall turnover days, but really the entire lake, the entire pond you're fishing, up shallow, especially in the fall, can have a good feeding frenzy as soon as that turnover happens and the lake's oxygen levels equalize. So a quick recap here. Early fall has tough fishing because of the thermocline and lethargic fish from the summer. The true fall can also have really tough fishing because of turnover, so look for current, flowing water, clear water, and good shallow cover. And then later in the fall, fish fast all over the lake looking for edges, points, channels, and any and all pathways the fish could be using as they move from ultra shallow to deep for the wintertime. Now, it wouldn't be a fishing video if I didn't talk about lures, at least to some extent. And the good news, although I guess it could be bad news depending on how you view it, is that in the fall, practically all bass fishing lures can work, but these ones here on the table are my favorites. Let me explain why. The small square bill, the jig head swim bait, the glide bait, the buzz bait, the spinner bait, the jig, and my skunk buster, the caffeine shad. And yes, that is quite a list of lures, and honestly, most of the ones here I have tied on 12 months out of the year living in Texas, but there's a reason why these 7 are my favorites, and let me explain why, starting with the square bill crankbait. Like I mentioned several times earlier in the sit down, a bait fish is a huge part of the bass's forage base throughout the fall, and in my opinion, there is no better search lure, or at least effective search lure, that actually imitates the size, the profile, and the speed of bait fish than a small square bill crankbait. Hopefully the focus is there. This here is the Strike King 1.0, but the good thing about the square bill category, and I guess you could kind of lump it into like the shallow diving category, the hybrid hunter fits in there, flat-sided crankbaits fit in there, but I like the square bill best because it has a wide wobble and it can imitate multiple different sizes of bait fish. So maybe you have tiny flat-nosed minnows. The 1.0 is great for imitating. Maybe you've got full-size threadfin shad, the 1.5 and 2.5, or you've got gizzards, the 4.0 to the 8.0. There's a whole bunch of square bills that could fit in that category, and that's why I like throwing it. Now, I mentioned it is a very effective search lure, and really it's not effective around grass. The hybrid hunter, the lipless are better than a square bill around grass, and around wood, it's definitely okay for. But most of the time I'm fishing this lure category around shallow rock, and shallow rock is just where bass happen to be in the fall anyways. Bait fish love not only spawning in the post-spawn on rock, but they just kind of love living around rock in general, and rock oftentimes forms natural or man-made points and long straightaways the bass can use to get from one area to the other that has really no difference or no change. And so pathways, points, dips, and channels, all that kind of stuff can be lined by either rock that's natural, man-made, or just hard bottom in general. And a square bill crankbait is my favorite lure to fish around rock or hard bottom. And so if I'm wanting to go fast and cover a whole bunch of water, especially with a small bait fish profile, it is the 1.0 square bill and really the shallow diving crankbait category as a whole. But if I'm not fishing around shallow water, and if I'm not wanting to go extra fast, the polar opposite while still imitating bait fish is the jig head paddle tail swim bait. A very popular alternative or kind of an addition to this category is the underspin. That's what you saw there on the table. And I'm also gonna lump in the minnow category, the jig head minnow, not just if you have forward facing, but if you do, you gotta have this thing on in the fall. It's just gonna get bit. The majority of really talented anglers in the tournament scene nowadays never have a jig head minnow clipped off. It's always tied on. And so if you just wanna cover some water, throw a jig head swim bait. And if you wanna cover some water that's very effective with forward facing, throw the the jig head minnow. Now, I'm gonna leave jig head minnow off to the side and discuss why I like the jig head swim bait. And that is because it has the same size profile as the shallow diving crankbaits, very small baitfish size, but you can retrieve it a whole lot slower. If I was to retrieve a crankbait the same speed that I want to retrieve a swim bait, especially a small, 2.5 to 3.8 inch one like this, I would not have nearly the effectiveness that this bait could have because it's meant to be retrieved faster. A swim bait, I can just go a whole lot slower. So if you have some nasty cold fronts, especially if you have a clearer, deeper water and a lot of really small bait fish, there's almost no better lure to just cast and retrieve straight back in. It's so easy. You can give it to your kid and they can do it on a Zebco 33 reel. That is lure number 2. Lure number 3 also is a bait fish imitator, but it's the polar opposite size of this, and that is the glide bait. Much like the first two I've talked about, the glide bait is a baitfish imitator. I would almost though call it a shad imitator. I'm not so sure what baitfish are this size right here. Baitfish I would say is threadfin and blue herring, but a gizzard shad and a Cisco, that kind of larger shad. Although Cisco is a trout, isn't it? Either way, you know what I'm saying. The bigger shaddy looking things are what a glide bait represents. Of course, you can also have a bluegill glide bait that goes up shallow that imitates a bluegill, but for the most part, I'm throwing a glide bait, and thanks to the scaled up series, I have gained so much confidence in that lure category, just picking this thing up and slinging it out there on an extra long cast, keeping it high in the water column and watching the fish eat it while I'm just kind of in between shallow cover areas. So let's say I'm flipping trees with a jig, one of the lures later on in this video, and I've gone tree, 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 and then there's 40 yards of open water, maybe with some lily pads or as a dock coming up or just a good grass edge or heck, total open water. I'll throw the trolling motor on high or start pedaling in my kayak and get the glide bait out, make even if it's just 2 to 3 casts in that area to kind of pass the time, it's almost always better to have a lure in the water as opposed to no lure in the water. And a 6+ inch glide bait is one that I found a lot of increased recent confidence in, and I've caught a few nice fish just in the open areas that I normally wouldn't have thrown anything, or I guess I could have caught them on the same lure that I was throwing or was flipping, but it's just not as effective in covering water. And yeah, I could pick up a square bill or I could pick up a swim bait, but a glide bait is just a way that if you don't catch one, fine, but it's possible to trick a random big one swimming out there because the big ones do happen to swim by themselves quite often in the fall, and so a glide bait is the best way to do it. If you haven't checked out swimbaits.com, they are the presenting sponsor of the Scaled Up series, and they have all the swim baits you need from mass-produced glide baits to total garage makers. So I will leave them linked down in the video description with some of my favorite glides from the Scaled Up series so far. So that is the glide bait. Next, we move on to my classic lure, and it's the last baitfish imitator, or I'd say the last soft plastic baitfish imitator, and that is my skunk buster. I feel like a soft plastic jerkbait needs no more introduction. It's just a perfect baitfish imitator. You can retrieve it really fast with a heavier belly weighted hook. You can go totally weightless and let it like kind of just float down there a foot every 3 to 4 seconds. I don't want to talk about this anymore because it just works so well. Throw it out there, twitch it, fish bite it, especially in ponds. If you're skunked or you don't want to be skunked, pull this thing out. Now, staying in the vein of reaction baits, we're actually going to go to my #1 topwater that just recently has made its way onto this list, but I foresee where I live in the country and the type of fishing I'm going to be doing moving forward, more kayak stuff, more jet boat stuff. This lure right here is one you need to throw, and I will be the buzzbait. Just listen to that. This thing gets chomped, let me tell you, especially in really, really shallow water. And I truly think the buzzbait is the best lure for covering water that's a top water. I'm gonna rephrase that. It is the best top water for covering water, the most efficient, and it just gets a really big bite. Not to say that a plopper couldn't get that, not to say that a walking bait couldn't get that. Of course they can. Now, the only downside to the buzzbait is that it is one of the only sinking topwater lures. Most of them, whether it's a hollow belly frog or a hard plastic lure, they float on top of the water. So you can fish them really, really slowly next to submergent or emergent pieces of cover. But a buzzbait, you can't. You got to keep it retrieving. So you can lift your rod tip up and go slower with it to keep that retrieve slower. But 100% of the time, you have to keep this thing moving across the top of the water to have it work effectively. But the reason why I love this bait so much in the fall is because A, I want to cover water, so it's great for that. B, it can be fished really, really close to any kind of snaggy stuff and sometimes on top of it. Now, matted out vegetation, no, you're gonna want to go with a frog or a buzz frog like the new Strike King Buzz Minnow. I've been in love with that bait recently. But if I'm making long casts against some laydowns, against a rock, ledge kind of area, or just over a big grass flat, yes, a plopper could work in some of those scenarios, but I've made a lot of casts in rivers and creeks lately that a plopper would just get stuck. And so if I'm gonna cover water, a buzzbait is the most weedless version. And this one here, the Strike King with the buzz total at the bottom, is my favorite one recently. But if the fish do not want top water and they still want something flashy and vibration-y and a wire bait, I'm going with a spinnerbait. And that is for the simple fact that this thing is the best bait fish imitator, especially in slightly dingier water or really, really windy water, and it is the most weedless out of all reaction baits. So I know I said a square bill was great. I'm really just talking about around shallow, hard bottom and rock. A spinnerbait is great for bumping into the side of stumps, for retrieving fast and burning it over a brush pile, or for slow crawling it across the bottom in all kinds of grass and muck. A spinnerbait is the best one for that. Yes, it beats a chatterbait in terms of weedlessness. Chartreuse and white with a small fluke style trailer is my favorite way to go, and whether it's double willow or one small willow and one Indiana, those are my favorite spinnerbait combos. I just have a whole lot of newfound confidence in a spinnerbait recently, especially for smallmouth bass. If you've got a small body of water with smallmouth in any kind of wind or current, you need to be throwing a spinnerbait. I don't care how late in the fall you're watching this video. And last but not least, not every time I go in the water am I gonna chunk and wind, cover water. Oftentimes, I'm throwing something very, very slow, and my favorite lure for that category, whether it's deep or shallow, is a jig. This one here being the Outcast Tackle Juice Jig, just a good overall shallow wood, shallow grass type of jig, but I could increase the size, go to a 1/2 ounce or a 5/8 and fish it even deeper, but I usually fish a football jig if I'm going deep and a swim jig if I'm going extra shallow. But whether it's dirty water and I'm going after bluegill eaters with green pumpkin or black and blue, or it is a super shallow fish exploding on bait fish around the grass sort of thing, a white swim jig works fantastic for that. A jig, along with the glide bait, will probably get you the biggest bites of this fall. So do not get scared of a glide bait being hard to fish and hard to cast and hard to hook the fish and land them. Because if you can do it right, you can catch giants. Same thing with a jig. It is a thicker hook style, and so the hook set has to be a little bit harder. But these two lures are definitely worth your time, and I have had some amazing fall days flipping and skip casting a jig around, especially around shallow wood and boat docks. Well, my goodness, folks, what a wealth of information. Again, most of this came from my buddy Stephen Barden. I knew 75%, I would say, but he really helps me understand more about the fall and why the bass and the entire ecosystem does what it does. Now, if you like the bass behavior series, the more science-based approach, you're gonna love this channel. I've got some awesome ones coming for this winter, and especially doing some in the spring that I kind of missed out on last time. If you wanna watch another science-based video with Stephen in it, I will leave that one up here in the corner. Again, he is such a smart man of fishery science. And I will leave one of my kayak river fishing videos in the fall that I filmed a few weeks ago up here in this corner, also clickable. My name is Tyler. As always, it's a dang pleasure, and we'll see y'all next time right here on TRF.